with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and for which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Soul Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. This is another live edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Smiles Lewis. This is the weekly live news roundup show for the 501c3 nonprofit charitable community organization, the Anomaly Archives, aka Scientific Anomaly Institute. And let's dive right in. You probably are aware that you can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, and find out more about us there. We have links to past episodes, past events, both in person and virtual, as well as information about our 7,000 plus item collection. That's over 7,000 books in our collection, thousands of periodicals, digital files, paper files, all kinds of stuff. And we are just part of that wave of folks who recognize the value in preserving UFO and anomalous science-related history. Thank you so much for joining us. You can find a link at the website over to our Flipboard, where almost all the links I'm going to cover tonight can be found. We have a ton of news for tonight's show, and of course there is a huge archive over at the Flipboard of the thousands of articles that have been flipped there over the last many years. And yeah, I was just going to run down some of these that I've posted since last week, as well as some other items. You know, in talking about the alleged apparent connection between nuclear weapons, nuclear facilities, nuclear material under military governmental control, and the connection to UFO sightings, UAP, UFO, close encounters. As much as I've tried to give a balanced perspective on that, I tend to have been leaning into the skepticism of, well, maybe it isn't really a known or verifiable connection, despite some interesting papers that we talked about last week and other people's research that seems to indicate that, yes, indeed, there is a connection. Well, I was reminded this past week or so by various posters, including a YouTuber, I think his name's maybe Tom Owens, who posted 4 years ago a little video about a series of UFO sightings in Texas that I had forgotten about, but I was also reminded by good UFO historian Jeff Knox. Here is a post from Jeff back at the end of last month, April 27th. Today in UFO history, close encounters with drones, probes at weapons storage site in Camp Hood, Texas. This is listed as being April 27th, 1949. And as usual, he gives a synopsis of it, in this case from George Eberhardt's citation, which is in the links below, along with the other sources for this information. And he gives links to the documents that talk about these series of sightings. And I believe this series of sightings occurred over a number of days in March and April of 1949, just north of Austin in what was at the time called Camp Hood. and now is called Fort Hood, and is related to the town of Killeen. And another this case is actually in the hundreds of Project Blue Book unknowns, those cases that Project Blue Book in all its debunking glory could not find a logical explanation for. Of course, we were talking last week about their and other people's attempts to say that certain UFO sightings were just misidentifications of the U-2 spy plane, and that they said it was an unknown when in fact they knew that it was this high altitude recon plane. In this case, maybe they knew something else was going on, but again, we're more interested in keeping that secret. But I believe over at another website, there's a brief description that says Camp Hood, Texas, 7:52 p.m. Witnesses, guards on the 2nd Armored Division, while awaiting the start of a flare firing, they watched for an hour while 8 large green, red, and white flare-like objects flew in generally straight lines. That seems very strange to be considered an unknown to me when it's being described as flare-like, but stays aloft for that long. That's all. That does seem a little anomalous, perhaps. But the other, let's pull that up there. This other video I found from the Tom Owen YouTube channel, Tom Owens UAP, excuse me, is dated 5/4/1949, and talks about this U.S. Army establishes UFO tracking net at Killeen Base. This is very interesting to me because if I knew this, I had forgotten. But he basically shows in a very short video that there was apparently a UFO triangulation project happening at Killeen base here in Texas, and it all seemed to revolve around this March 6th, March 7th series of sightings, which I've got the still on right here. And he links it, interestingly. One of the objects I think was described as like an ice cream cone, and he connects it to, of course, the famous part of the Close Encounters movie where the kid goes, ice cream. But this also goes into a very strange little bit. I'm not sure if the audio is going to work here. Victor, you'll have to tell me if this audio works.
1949, the U.S. Army had established a UFO observation and triangulation network at Killeen Base. In his 1956 book, Ed Ruppelt referenced this early UFO network by incorrectly claiming that the Air Force had killed the Army plan to establish it. He repeated the word killed 4 times in the paragraph, which many analysts found odd. You can read this here on pages 57 to 58 of Ed Ruppelt's The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. Pause the video if you wish.
Okay, and this is synchromysticism on my part here, but I immediately am like, Killeen, Texas, and this guy's saying it was killed over and over again. Okay, there's it's a total stretch, I know. Anyway, it is a nice little 5-minute video that you might find interesting. Like I say, Jeff Knox also talks about it on his Facebook blog that I mentioned earlier. Don't know that much about these cases, but find all this very interesting, and thought you might as well. That's pretty much all I've got for UFO stuff this today. Meanwhile, over at yahoo.com, they're reprinting an article from the Telegraph, not my favorite news outlet, but hey, it's about lucid dreaming. That always interests me. The dream training that neuroscientists think could help cure insomnia. Well, I thankfully don't suffer from insomnia generally, but I think almost anybody who's had trouble sleeping probably empathizes with folks who actually suffer from it on a regular basis. And I was curious to see what sort of training or what sort of benefit this might have. And while it doesn't seem like a silver bullet, it does sound like, yes, lucid dreaming has a lot of different benefits that could include helping somebody overcome bouts of insomnia. Other types of therapy that they say does help, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is our first line treatment, says Professor Jason Ellis, director of the Northumbria Center for Sleep Research at Northumbria University. Quote, "It's fantastic. It works in 70 to 80% of cases, but unfortunately it's very limited in getting face-to-face appointments. Waiting lists are long and private therapy is unaffordable for many, so we do need an alternative." And they claim startling results. This is where the Dreamscape comes in. Published in 2020, they did a small study observing 48 insomniacs. Quote, "We taught them how to lucid dream over a period of 2 weeks. Very simple stuff, 5 or 6 techniques that are appropriate for people with insomnia. After the training, 77% of participants had a lucid dream, and most of those reported significant improvements in their sleep. Quote, we saw significant reductions in insomnia symptoms, depressive symptoms, and anxious symptoms." So it seems to have a benefit in terms of mood as well. Why would this work? And they're speculating here. One idea is that lucid dreams interrupt and change other dreams that might be stressful or frightening. Okay. I do think of so many people I've heard talk about lucid dreaming in their own experience. It's like there's something scary happening in their dream, and they suddenly realize that they are dreaming, and they are like, wake up. They're telling themselves to wake up. Now, that's obviously not what these insomniacs are going to want to do. And that's kind of the point of some of the other parts of this article. They're saying, you know, that the training and the types of techniques that can benefit somebody who wants to have more lucid dreams are not necessarily the kinds of things that would benefit an insomniac who's just trying to get some good sleep. But there are some interesting ideas here. And like it says here, all our anxiety dreams are based on our worst fears, says Charlie Morley, a lucid dreaming teacher and author of several books on dreaming. Quote, "Now, if your worst fear is that you've got insomnia and can't sleep, then you might dream of being up all night with insomnia." Now, I've not really heard that kind of description from dreamers, but then I probably haven't talked to that many insomniacs who are also remembering their dreams. Teaching people how to lucid dream may help with this phenomena too, because the practice is all about knowing that you're in a dream. If you can learn to recognize when you're in a dream, it becomes a reassuring sign for insomniacs that they are in fact out for the count, it says. But the other interesting thing, of course, and this does not surprise me, I think I've heard other research about this, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder folks may also benefit from this. Obvious situation of somebody a war veteran finds themselves in a dream back in Iraq. If they know that they're dreaming, they can overcome that perhaps. This says studies on lucid dreaming as a treatment for PTSD show promising results, with self-reported PTSD symptoms and nightmare distress falling sharply. At the end of one study that Morley conducted, 85% of participants were no longer classified as even having PTSD based on the scores they returned. And there's more over there at yahoo.com. And they even give a little bit of detail, a little synopses on things that might help you achieve lucid dreaming if that's something that you're interested in. Meanwhile, moving back to the UFO subject briefly, this dailymail.com article, not particularly worth your time per se, but this headline, "Bizarre moment, radar picks up a structure above quote unquote UFO hotbed during rocket experiment." This is all about Skinwalker Ranch and the show, whatever the heck it's called, that is so popular. And it goes into some of the stuff that I'd already seen. I'm not an avid watcher of this show, but I do kind of enjoy it, even as I'm like, well, that's intriguing, but it's not science. They act like they're performing science, but to my knowledge, none of their experiments, none of their research has been peer reviewed, is being made public in a way that's accessible to scientists to try to engage with. And that's unfortunate, I think, where it's actually, you know, something that if they did, it might actually be worth something. But this article is just documenting what, if you've paid any attention to what's going on with this show, they think that there's some kind of structure underneath the mesa. There's been some very strange issues with GPS and rockets that are shot up into the air with GPS, and the GPS data is showing it as having gone into the ground, into the mesa. These are very bizarre things. And I bring all this up not because I think you should go watch the show Skinwalker Ranch, but one of the staunchest critics in the UFO field of the Skinwalker Ranch stuff has been our friends Jack Brewer and Erica Lukes over at Expanding Frontiers Research. And back in November of 2022, Jack interviewed Thomas Winterton. He's one of the fellows. I think he's the one who developed some sort of head trauma, brain swelling or something that mostly has been presented as if it were the result of microwave radiation exposure, and that it was life-threatening. And this has been the cause of concern for so many people visiting the ranch, that they don't want to, have this phenomena do its quote unquote hitchhiker effect, where these poltergeist type phenomena follow the person home, or experience, in this case, some kind of actual physical trauma, brain injury type of situation. Now, this, let's see, I think it says something here in the, so yeah, it says Thomas Winterton agreed to speak with Jack Brewer of Expanding Frontiers Research about potential conflicts of interest arising in his work in the Uintah Basin. So we've talked, well, I think I've mentioned the headlines that Expanding Frontiers Research has put out there. And those include they're getting Freedom of Information Act requests, or rather the Utah state version of that, regarding local county, a local county there that has been putting up money for the Phenomenon. And sure enough, about 6 days ago, Jack posted to the EFR website, expandingfrontiersresearch.org, PhenomenaCon contracts enrich select speakers. And this is basically one of their approaches. EFR is criticizing Skinwalker Ranch and the people around it, is that they're promoting this pseudoscience oriented event, and the phenomena, the alleged phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch, and that they're enriching themselves through conflict of interest type contracts with the local county. This is good work in the sense of folks trying to suss out, where the inappropriate money making might be happening. But as you might expect, this is not sitting well with some of the particulars. That person, Thomas Winterton, a few days ago, they posted this. Thomas Winterton responds and threatens the EFR with legal action because he doesn't like what they're saying, and is basically trying to push it onto them, saying they need to get this information. They need to put out this information that they're saying proves or suggests that there's something inappropriate going on. I don't know. I have real mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I don't think it's necessarily wrong for local cities or counties to try and support through funds paranormal, UFO-oriented events. These things could, in fact, I think, bring tourism dollars to the local area, and that's, I think, why we see such a proliferation of UFO festivals and paranormal-oriented festivals around the country now. It's really catching on. This is, this idea of legend tripping, that people do like to go to these events. A good friend of mine once said that the travel channels, so many of the UFO and paranormal shows that you see on TV, on cable TV, are in fact just basically travel, tourism oriented entertainment to try to get people to these locations. Anyway, I do think that Erica Lukes and Jack Brewer and the folks at EFR are doing good work. I'm, as I think you know, much more interested in the nature of the true phenomena, the true UFO phenomena. But as I've often said, there is the UFOs, UFA, UX, the false faux UFOs, and there is the true foes, the true UFO phenomena. And the false faux UFO phenomena are the result of humans deceiving other humans, and that is a big part of the UFO phenomena at large. And it's certainly worth the effort, I think, to try to suss that out. I have other friends who feel critical of that no, it's just whack-a-mole. There's always going to be more charlatans, more hucksters, more snake oil salesmen out there. You may get rid of one or two, but there's always going to be another to take their place. But I think it's worthy work. We'll see. Let's see what else we got. Oh, so I'm not sure if I've gotten through all of this. I think I have. So this is an interesting one over at oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the it's the MIT Technology Review has this, a brief weird history of brainwashing. L. Ron Hubbard, Operation Midnight Climax, and Stochastic Terrorism, the Race for Mind Control Changed America Forever, by Annalee Newitz. Now, I think this is behind a paywall, so it may be a challenge to read, but I think if you go there at just the right time, you can get it. And it's not the most deepest or comprehensive overview of the issues of brainwashing and mind control, but it gives some interesting insights and some history that I may or may not have been aware of, going all the way back to 1951, 59. There's some stuff in here, though, that is kind of interesting if true. And there, let's see, when a senator asked about Hunter's work for the OSS, the operative boasted that he was the first to, quote, discover the technique of mind attack in mainland China, for the first to use the word brainwashing in written language, and the first, except for the Chinese, to use the word in speech in any language. None of this was true. Other operatives associated with the OSS had used the word in reports before Hunter published articles about it. More important, as the Chinese University of Hong Kong legal scholar Ryan Mitchell has pointed out, with the link there to a made in China journal.com, the Chinese word Hunter used at the hearing, Xinao, Xinao, translated as wash brain, has a long history going back to scientifically minded Chinese philosophers of the late 19th century who used it to mean something more akin to enlightenment. Yet Hunter's sensational tales still became an important part of the disinformation and pseudoscience that fueled, quote, a mind control race during the Cold War, much like the space race. Inspired by new studies on brain function, the U.S. military and intelligence communities prepared themselves for a psychic war with the Soviet Union and China by spending millions of dollars on research into manipulating the human brain. This is ironically, brainwashing was not a widely used term among communists in China. The word Xinao, Mitchell told me in an email, is actually a play on an older word, Xixin, Xixin, or washing the heart, which alludes to a Confucian and Buddhist ideal of self-awareness. In the late 1800s, Chinese reformists such as Liang Zhuo, I'm sorry, I'm going to get all this wrong, replacing the character for heart with brain, in part because they were trying to modernize Chinese philosophy. But it goes on to basically say that this is now used to describe just brainwashing in general, the way Americans used it, but over in China, which I found interesting. And then there's interesting bits about this pamphlet from 1955, purported to be a translation of a work by the Russian secret police, claimed that the Soviets used drugs and psychology to control the masses, and that Dianetics, a pseudoscience invented by Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, could prevent brainwashing. And they basically speculate that, in fact, this was actually written by L. Ron Hubbard. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I feel frustrated by this article because it just seems to gloss over the government abuse. I mean, yes, there is this part here where it's talking about that, and gives a little bit of information on that, but to me, that is really much more important than the debunking of that. No evidence ever surfaced that MK Ultra was behind the children's death. Oh, this is talking, and this is something I'd never actually heard. Okay, so they're claiming, let's see, about the murder of these children in Atlanta. Wayne Williams, a black man who was eventually convicted of 2 of the murders, claimed at various points that he had been trained by the CIA. This led to popular conspiracy theories that MK Ultra had been experimenting on black people in Atlanta. Colin Dickey, author of Under the Eye of Power, How Fear of Secret Societies Shaped American Democracy, told me these conspiracy theories became, quote, a way of making sense of an otherwise mystifying and terrifying reality, which is that America is a country where black people are so disenfranchised that their murders aren't noticed. Dickey added that this MK Ultra conspiracy theory, quote, gave a shape to systemic racism, placing blame for the Atlanta child murders on the U.S. government. In the process, it also suggests that black people had been brainwashed to kill each other. All very interesting. There's more on that there. And there's some interesting insights here. But again, I don't feel like it's as good of a comprehensive overview, but it's interesting when something like the MIT Technology Review talks about this. Now, there was this one thing I wanted to read. Perhaps that means the anonymous National Security Council examiner was right to call Hubbard's black propaganda the work of an expert, unquote. If brainwashing is politics, then disinformation might be as effective or ineffective as a brain implant in changing someone's mind. Still, scholars have learned that political efforts at mind control do not have predictable results. Online disinformation leads to what Juliet Kayyem, a former assistant secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, identifies as stochastic terrorism, or acts of violence that cannot be predicted precisely but can be analyzed statistically. She writes that stochastic terrorism is inspired by online rhetoric that demonizes groups of people, but it's hard to know which people consuming that rhetoric will actually become terrorists and which of them will just rage at their computer screens, the result of coercive persuasion that works on some targets and misses others. And this just reminds me of this idea of dog whistling and the idea of triggering people. And none of this is all exactly the same, but it just reminds me of what I've been saying. And that is that the larger your audience as a presenter, as a media figure, the more responsibility you carry to try not to say speculative or inflammatory things that, again, that percentage of the population who are undoubtedly a part of your audience. Sorry, folks, not to say that any of you watching or listening right now are prone to violence, but could be triggered. And so I think it's very important to constantly stress that when you don't know something, you don't know it. Anyway, you can find out more about this at the MIT Technology Review. We'll give the link in the show notes. Let's see, what else have I forgotten to cover here? Real quickly, so Vatican urges caution over weeping Madonnas and other supposed apparitions. This is from finance.yahoo.com. So I think we'd reported previously on the fact that on the 17th, I believe, there was this news conference that some thought might involve the Vatican talking about aliens, but in fact, it was more just about apparitions and religious experiences. And it's important, I think, to note. Oh, I lost that. Oh, darn. We'll have a link to Newsweek as well as this Vatican or this Yahoo article. In the Newsweek article, there are links to the actual documents over at the Vatican.va, norms regarding the manner of proceeding and the discernment of presumed apparitions or revelations. And as these articles stress, no, there was no talk of aliens. It's strictly trying to talk about the interpretation of religious spiritual oriented experiences. Not to say that there isn't an overlap from a perspective that we're coming from, but just important to note that the Vatican did not, in fact, talk about aliens and UFO-UAP phenomena. Lastly, I think we covered the fact that there has been some legislation going around the country. To quote this text here, on April 11th, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee signed into law SB 2691, which bans the, quote, intentional injection, release, or dispersion, unquote, of chemicals within Tennessee with the express purpose of affecting temperature, weather, or the intensity of the sunlight. I was recently listening to this QAA, that's formerly QAnon Anonymous podcast. They just call it QAA now, and they've got this new nifty, scary looking logo. Their 275th episode is on anti-chemtrails laws and features the research and writings of this reporter, Teddy Wilson. And as always, I find it interesting. Lots of good information there, but at the same time, a skepticism level and a ridicule level that sometimes bother me. And the irony I find, though, in listening to this is they stress, how folks like me that are trying to talk to others about why people might be willing to believe this is because, of course, they get invoked. Folks invoke the idea of geoengineering as well. Maybe that's what's really going on with the quote unquote chemtrails or contrails, that there's a deliberate project to alter the weather through this whatever technology is alleged. And I believe in this episode of QAA that they say that there's never actually been any experimentation to this effect, which, as anytime somebody says there's never been anything, I tend to go, well, that's probably not correct. And of course, immediately I was finding articles. This one from the San Francisco Gate, sfgate.com. Bay Area City orders scientists to stop controversial cloud brightening experiment. This is from May 15th. Prior to this month, researchers were using specialized machines to spray salt water into the air above a decommissioned naval ship docked in Alameda. Their ultimate goal? To test if those machines could be used to brighten low-lying clouds above the water in an attempt to cool down the planet. But, of course, activists were like, no, don't you do that. Led by atmospheric scientists at the University of Washington, the experiment was part of a larger effort to find out if the warming effects of climate change could potentially be reduced by injecting salt aerosols into clouds, brightening them enough to reflect more sunlight away from the Earth. And city staff are working with a team of biological and hazardous materials consultants to independently evaluate the health and environmental safety of this particular experiment. And it's apparently been stopped for the time being. Meanwhile, also, this other article over at scientificamerican.com from just a month earlier, March 19th, 2024, high-profile geoengineering experiment shuts down. A beleaguered solar geoengineering project failed to conduct field tests because of opposition from environmentalists and indigenous residents. So it is definitely the case that there is real scientific efforts, military or otherwise, to do experiments like this. And whatever you think of legislature, politicians creating these rules, there is actually something to this. That's not to justify wild speculations about chemtrail conspiracies, but there you go. All right, folks. That's going to be it for tonight. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Stay tuned. Keep watching the website. There will be more updates on some interesting projects coming up soon. Thank you. Good night.